First things first, thank you 10 subscribers who have in the last 24 hours made my count go up. You guys made my morning, day, and night, so thank you. Feel free to comment and talk amongst yourselves. I get to every comment. Obviously, I'm not big enough to have an excuse not to, so I speak to all of you. So please partake in the discourse and in the talk respectfully, of course. Be nice to each other, which you guys are, so we don't have a problem like that. I already love the community we're building. You guys are awesome. Please continue to interact, and yeah, welcome. So without further ado, let's talk about what you guys are really here for, which is my review of Newborn. It's a psychological horror film. I say horror, it's very light horror, but it's a psychological thriller horror film about a convict that is released after 7 years sentence in isolation, completely in isolation, for a crime he didn't commit, but that his baby brother committed, and he willingly took the heat for in order to prevent his baby brother from serving a life sentence because he has priors. Now, during the time of his sentence, he rescued an inmate from being murdered by corrupt cops. Originally, his sentence wasn't supposed to be 7 years, but the crooked cops blamed it on him and made it seem like they weren't trying to kill an inmate. And so his sentence became one of 7 years in isolation. So he's not loved by the cops. Eventually, they found out that he was innocent, and the cops lost their job, and he was released. So that's where the film starts. We are presented to him 7 years after he is released. His wife, he has a wife and a kid. The kid he didn't know about. The kid his wife had just after he went to prison. They didn't know she was pregnant at the time. And so the kid doesn't speak. He's 7 years old, doesn't speak, and he suffers from seizures. So we don't really get a reason as to why. It's insinuated that it was for some kind of trauma that maybe his mother went through that was passed on to him. But nonetheless, we don't really get a reason as to why he chooses not to speak. And we also don't get a reason as to why he has seizures. But it does serve the story later on in a way that I thought was satisfying, even though I would have liked to have a fucking reason, just, you know. It just seems that everyone in this film needs to have some kind of reflective theme of trauma. The movie picks up after he's released from jail, and they decide to take a trip to the mountains in the Carolinas, from Queens to the mountains. And I think it was Carolinas, but I could be wrong. The road sign eludes me. So they go to this resort that belongs to a friend who is keeping it under construction. So it's not fully abandoned. It's yet to open, but they are given the opportunity to stay there all by themselves so that he can sort of acclimate with society again and not be overstimulated by all the human bullshit that he's been away from for 7 years, especially being as understimulated as he has been in isolation. And immediately I thought, like, ooh, The Shining. Like a movie, this film about psychological trauma and the decline of the human condition in a resort in the mountains with no one else around, kind of reminded me of another movie about the human decline of the human condition. But nonetheless, I can say that kind of set my expectations at a certain level, unreasonably so. Nothing's going to be like The Shining, but it didn't hurt the film. I was just kind of excited as to like what the insinuation was behind that because they knew what they were doing. They meet a man who is responsible for looking after the hotel. And he's a white man. And the reason that is important is because the cops in jail who framed our main character were white. So there's already this sort of underlining theme of systemic racism. And there's also a sense that now that the cops know that he's out, they're looking for him. And that plays into his paranoia, and it reinforces his decline and all the negative things that come from the adjustment disorder that he is suffering from. And so there's already a little bit of tension between him and, say, the caretaker. Along the way, we get some really great emotional moments and tense moments where, you know, he has someone knocks into him at a restaurant. Right. And we kind of already know how that's going to go. But the way that it builds up is quite tense. There's also some really tense moments with his wife. I love the character of his wife. She is so patient and so loving. And every single line she delivers with a sense of caution, but love and intimacy. Like she knows anything could set him off. And she speaks to him in such a catering and loving manner that her portrayal of the wife was my favorite portrayal in the film. Not to say the main character wasn't incredible. David O, he was fucking insane. He was so good. And by the end of the third act, I was feeling so empathetic towards everything he had gone through. And you feel it, and you feel it from his wife. It's affecting his kid. It's affecting his wife. It's a heavy film. And I love that they make some parallels between veterans' adjustment disorder and the adjustment disorder of a prisoner in isolation. And as a veteran myself and someone who's very close with other veterans, that speaks really true. And it's really interesting how those parallels cross. Because the caretaker himself is a veteran with a Purple Heart. And so whenever the veteran's talking to him, he is speaking to him with a sense of understanding, but also caution, because he knows both the good and the bad. He knows the good he can provide him, but he knows how bad it could get for him. And then there's also he's a white man, and the cops supposedly are looking for him, and he's a man of authority. So maybe there's some kind of tie, there's some kind of correlation. And eventually it's mentioned like, hey, he might know all the cops in town. So like, I don't really feel comfortable talking to him about anything. And so there's this tension that's built between them two that is palpable. And it's some of the best shit in the movie for sure. The interactions between the characters in this film are good because you don't know how he is going to react to everyone else, especially when his little brother comes back into the picture. It's really tense writing. I mean, the stuff that they do between the characters is where this film really feels like something strong. The weak elements are in fact the horror, and it's because the horror really just focuses on hallucinations. And I hate the trope of hallucinations in films, especially when a whole film quite literally bases its horror only on hallucinations as a representation of PTSD. And PTSD is many things. It's not just hallucinations. Now, granted, we do go into the adjustment disorder element of this in many, many ways, but the horror does feel a little bit forced when you get these like crazy abstract images of like a bunch of prisoners, inmates in orange jumpsuits coming out of the woods, or like there's this beautiful shot that is beautiful, but it doesn't serve the story, where he's dreaming of a bunch of holes dug up in the ground, and every single one of them has an inmate sleeping in them, sort of representing that their fate is decided once they're in the system and come out. And it's how he feels. Like, it's a great way of eliciting a visceral response from the audience. But when your characters and your writing is strong enough to carry it, you don't need any of that. You honestly don't, because the horror for me and the thrilling elements of it and the tension came from his interactions with the caretaker. You know, at some point they're in the woods and they hear a gunshot. Obviously people fucking hunt in the woods, but he feels like it was directed at him. And the only person in the vicinity who could shoot a gun is the caretaker, who's a veteran. So already you have elements, very Hitchcockian elements, where I'm like, this is where you're at your strongest. Keep it here. You're in a small town. Everyone is, you know, it's a kind of a cliche, but in a lot of states, it is true that you go to these super wooded forest communities, and minorities aren't something they see on the daily. There are smaller racist communities within very rural spaces. And so, of course, that already has tension, right? He's a convict. You have that element there of people watching him walk around and knowing who he is, because his case was kind of big it was kind of big socially. So people know of him, people know about him. And then you have everyone stuck in this resort, and he's forced to interact with his family in a certain way that also brings tension. And you've got the caretaker that brings tension. All that stuff really works. And the finality of it, and the emotional gut punch, and how they utilize his son, his relationship between his son and him, to give you this yin and yang, right? Like, the only thing that is holding him and grounding him is his son. But he's keeping his son close in moments when he is having his worst episodes. And you wonder how that's going to affect a boy who can't talk, and who every time there is a moment of high stress, he has a seizure. And so that tension is already there, because you're wondering, well, how is this going to affect a 7-year-old, right? Like, how is this going to affect him, the relationship? And it progresses, and it gets obviously gets violent, psychological thriller. It gets violent, it gets intense. And in that moment where we get to the third act, it's kind of the third act that you expect, but the performances are so strong that you're like, I don't even care. This is good. There is a psychological twist. There is sort of a sleight of hand of with a specific character that you've seen many, many times before. I don't want to give away too much, but there is a character who is there, who is, let's say, not exactly tangible, if that makes sense. And you've seen this trope many, many times, like so many times. You're like, yeah, but they did such a good job in building the story between the characters that at no point did I see that coming until maybe the very last minute. And it was satisfying in how it was delivered that I wasn't upset with it. It is not a new twist, but I think in terms of this story, it works. But in terms of PTSD material and adjustment disorder films, it's something that has been done before, if that makes sense. So this is not a bad movie. In fact, if you removed all the horror elements and the hallucinations and you made it a tight character piece, a tight psychological thriller, how 70% of this movie is, that 70% would be your 100% for this movie. But there's a 30% that is kind of unfocused and is forcing the horror. And you could take that away completely and still give me something that is pretty dark, pretty heavy, and actually makes you reflect on the system and just the human, how fragile we are. Like we are fragile. No matter how strong we pretend to be, there is the stronger you are, the more fragile you are. You know, you have to build really, really thick walls. But the moment that someone breaks through those walls, you are fragile. Like we are fragile. It's just our walls come in different depths. And I thought this was such a great exploration of that it had me entranced whenever we were doing the dramatic shit. We genuinely were. It's just all the other fluff that it just could have. It feels like they were trying to make it a genre movie, and they really didn't need to. You could still the drama here is so heavy that this could still very much feel like a horror film or a character study. In a lot of ways, you know, you could have given me a Straw Dogs like thriller with psychological elements, and you did give me that, but then you gave me a bunch of other fluff that I really didn't need. 30% of this movie could have just left. It's not worth. I don't think you need to run out in theaters to see it, but I do think that there's some good stuff here to see. Maybe wait till it drops on streaming and give it a watch. I think it's overall enjoyable. So that's my review for Newborn. Thank you guys for showing up. Thank you, 10, for showing up. Appreciate you guys. And as always, I'll see you tomorrow, and I'll see you at the movies.